All right, good morning. It's a beautiful Monday, the 29th day in the month of November 2021. The month is gradually crawling. It's about time for the newspaper review, another edition, which comes up every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. In no particular order, we have the Nigerian Authority, we have the Daily Times, we have Daily Champion, we have National Economy, we have New Telegraph, Daily Independent Leadership, This Nigeria, Daybreak, we have Nigerian News Direct, the Blueprint newspaper, Business Day, This Day newspaper. We'll try as much as possible to cover all these papers. But in the meantime, you can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook is at Lagoon Radio Nigeria, on Instagram and Twitter is at Lagoonradio.Ng. You can also listen via our website on www.lagoonradio.ng for more info and entertainment here 24/7. The Lagoon Radio app is very, very much available on Google Play Store and App Store, irrespective of the device that you use. If you want to put a face to the voices here, you can actually log on to our YouTube channel at Lagoon TV. On YouTube, you are live, and of course, we're live on Facebook. My name is Taiwo Adeola Shabilugbe, and with me in the studio is Koinsola Alao.
Good morning, Lagos, Nigeria. Good morning, Lagos, Nigeria. Trust you had a splendid weekend.
Yeah, good morning. So I'll be starting with the Authority newspaper. At the very top, gunmen attack Just Correctional Center. The story is on page 3. Subsidy 5,000 naira palliative. Huge disgrace, Archbishop Chukuma says. The story is on page 9. Ohanese youth tackle Arewa over Nnamdi Kanu's release. Still on page 3 of the paper. APC not keen on zoning NAT convention 2023 election, says youth wing. The story is on page 17 of the Authority newspaper. And the major headline there says DSS raises the alarm over insurgents plan to attack military bases. And the writer to the story says fingers bother communities, advises customs and others to countermeasure. This is the major headline, and the story is on the front page. You can continue reading on page 2. At the bottom of the paper, our Bridge Bank option saved over 12,667 jobs, secured 1.2021 trillion naira deposit, says NDIC. The story is on page 16. NSAS reports Syrup 116 Nigerians drag Buhari to court. The story is on page 15. NCC to Nodit heed to standards ethical conduct. The story is on page 17. And lastly, on the front page of the paper, Nigerian risk losing assets over loan from China and experts want. The story is on page 5.
So moving on to the Daily Times paper for this morning. This says our Bridge Bank option saved over 12,667 jobs and secured 1.21 trillion naira deposits, NDIC says. And the writer under that says paid 8.28 billion to 443 insured depositors, 1,000 billion naira to uninsured as at September 2021. Corporation reviews bank DIF contributions, others to improve stability. All of this you can find on page 2 of the Daily Times newspaper. 4 months after declaring 289 billion naira profit, Nigerians still await NNPC's audit report. Doubt, anxiety persists as corporation keeps mum. And come clean. Publish details of all dividends received. Stakeholders urge organization. You can read up more on page 2. And from the news aspect as regards NSAS, Lagos NSAS panel was illegal, says Keyamo. You can read more on page 4. Under politics, Nigerians raise concerns as Buhari moves to appoint INEC national commissioners. You can read up more on page 3. And other business news on the Daily Times paper. Infracorp to commence operations next year with 1 trillion naira seed funding, says Emefiele. All of this can be found on page 4 of the Daily Times paper. And finally, Africa not a source of COVID-19 shouldn't be punished over new variant. AFDP president says on page 5, and that is all about it.
All right, moving on to the Daily Champion. Nwanya will get an NIEE Fellowship Award. The story is on page 9. Mother child burnt to death in tanker explosion. Has 7 others perished in Ogun, Anambra auto crashes. The story is on page 6. You can read up more on that. NSAS report: Sarah Sues Buhari wants court to order arrest of suspect. Yeah, the story is also on page 6. All right, still on the paper. Cosmas Maduka co-chairs Chairman loses wife, charity. The story is on page 6 as well. NDLEA intercepts 16,385 kg drugs smuggled into Lagos on waterways. Arrest 70-year-old woman. Others over 6,586 kg narcotics seized in Edo, Delta, Kano, and Yobe State. Well, this you can find on page 8. Okowa Emefiele, Ovie others bid Tony Onyagu farewell. The story is on page 7. Kidnappers released 10 out of 13 abducted Zaria local government staff. The story is on page 6. Let's return to upholding family values in rebuilding Nigerians' security, says Buhari. The story is on page 3. I think that'll be all on the Daily Champion newspaper.
Okay, very quickly moving on to the National Economy newspaper. Government created AMCON to deal with a special problem. You can read up more on page 4. And, port security officers Bilmon, Nigerians annual $26.3 billion loss to maritime crisis and crimes. You can read up more on page 4. FIRS seeks stronger relationship with development partners. All of this can be found on page 5. FAN intensifies fight against extortion and suspends airport officials. You can read up more on page 4. Experienced professional at Nigerian Exchange Group. You can read up more on who the leader is on page 4 of the Nigerian and National Economy newspaper.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the New Telegraph. Banks personnel cost up 4.57% to 342.96 billion naira. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 3. GDP growth to slow to 3.5% in Q4, says FDC. The story is on page 24 of the New Telegraph newspaper. Regulator creates new domestic base price for gas. The story is on page 6. Eric pilots foil robbery attempt on aircraft. And the writer to the story says robbery incidents, a disturbance trend at Lagos airport. The story is on page 3. Inmates escape assailants trapped as bandits attack Jos Correctional Center. That's on page 30. UBA Foundation project Hope as Uzoka lights up garden. The story is on page 8, and the major headline there says Center for Social Justice proposed 5,000 naira palliative for 40 million Nigerians fraudulent. Says subsidy always on front burner each time government's resources are lean. Doling out 2.4 trillion naira to cushion effect of removing 1.8 trillion naira fuel subsidy absurd. Fuel subsidy removal will impose hardship on Nigerians, says PDP and others. All this you can find on pages 2 and pages 31 of the New Telegraph newspaper. Ex-chairman Doherty, while Lagos PDP was evicted from state secretariat. The story is on page 3. And we have the minister advocates castration for incest rape perpetrators. The story is on page 2, and at the very bottom, a study had revealed that fatty acids from plants could reduce death risk. You can read up more on that on page 7.
So with me is the Daily Independent newspaper. Forces gather to fight Bonny-led APC National Caretaker Committee. You can read up more on page 29 of the Daily Independent paper. Pirates Q4 abduct 6 oil workers in Bayelsa State. Right under that says gunmen trapped in Jos prison after attacking custodial center. You can read up more on page 26, same 26 of the Daily Independent newspaper. Major headline says no sanity at FX market 123 days after sales ban to BDCs. Analyst wants dollar backlog cleared to alt naira devaluation. All of these can be found on page 6 of the Daily Independent newspaper. CNP slams NLC, TUC over fuel subsidy. Accuses federal government of deceit in subsidy implementation. You can read up on page 6. Still on page 6, tanker explosion kills mother grandchild in Abeokuta. And moving on to page 7, EFCC raids farmers governor. Daniels, hotels and arrests suspected fraudsters. Still on page 7, I'm not supposed to be in politics, Jonathan says. Another major headline, federal government draws flags over improper national career rebirth. Project lacks transparency. Dead on arrival. Stakeholders say. You can read up all of these on page 7. Finally, gunmen killed 2 policemen, burned their bodies in Anambra State. All of these and more can be found on page 2 of the Daily Independent newspaper.
All right, moving on to the leadership newspaper. NDIC pays 113 billion naira to depositors of failed banks. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 7. And the major headline on the paper says, concern over vacuum in INEC. INEC has 5 national commissioners retire next week. The story is on page 4 and the writer to the story says, President yet to make nominations. Southeast, South, Northeast, North Central, Southwest may be unrepresented. No cause for alarm, says INEC. All this you can read up on page 4 of the leadership newspaper. Gunmen attack Plateau Correctional Center. It's on page 4. DSS denies report of extrajudicial killings in Southeast. The story is on page 7. Reps give postal officers powers or to search aircraft. The story is on page 6. Subsidy removal will worsen hardship, says PFN. The story is on page 14. And we have electoral bill. PMB will consider public interest before assenting, says Malami. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 7. Federal government laments high malaria mortality rate. The story is on page 5. I think that'll be all on the leadership newspaper.
Moving on to this Nigerian newspaper, all set for this Nigerian newspaper inaugural lecture. Dignitaries confirm attendance. Kuka to deliver lecture. Iradia Ozokome. Aremu also to speak. 4 distinguished Nigerians to receive gold prize. You can read up more on page 6. Don't punish Africa for new COVID-19 variants. AFDB President additional warns. You can read up more on page 7 for more enlightenment. Concerning the NSAS reports, legal fireworks, Serap 116 Nigerians drag federal government to court, insists on punishment for indicated security operatives. You can read up more on page 6. PFN to federal government saying subsidy removal will worsen suffering. You can read up on page 7. And Nigeria needs 400 billion naira annually to maintain federal roads. Senator says on page 7 of this Nigerian newspaper.
All right, moving on to Daybreak newspaper, Daybreak Nigeria. Okay, at the very top of the paper, Air Peace boost operations with 2 new Airbus 320 aircraft. The story is on page 16. As Zamfara state government lifts suspension of telecom services. The story is on page 11. Climate change, FCT minister assures residents of eco-friendly transportation system by 2027. Still on page 11. Please arrest immigration officer linked to orderly home invasion. Still on page 11. NDLEA intercept 12,385 kg drugs smuggled into Lagos on waterways. The story is on page 10. And boldly written on the front page, we have the red alert as COVID Omicron shakes global community. Virus potentially more contagious than previous variants. Indonesia bans arrivals from Nigeria, 7 other African countries. WHO dubs Omicron variant of concern. As fear grows, virus may resist vaccines and prolong pandemic. All this you can read up on page 4 of the Daybreak newspaper. Anambra APC suspends chairman Basil Ejidike. The story is on page 19. Please kill notorious bandit in Kaduna on page 18 as well. Zenith Bank MD risk a jail over contempt of court. The story is on page 16 and at the very bottom of the paper. NSAS report Serap 116 Nigerians sues Buhari seek arrest of indicted security personnel. The story you find on page 4 and that will be all on the Daybreak newspaper.
Moving on to the Nigerian News Direct, Business Open Day, Solwans provides court-edging technologies. You can read up on page 4. Awolowo finalizes initiatives for Nigerians to benefit from $4.7 trillion export of services. You can read up more of this on page 6. Oyetola quiet on assuming but action governor Osun Khan chairman says on page 10. NDIC to review contribution of banks to deposit insurance fund. The writer under that says pays over 108 billion naira to 443 insured uninsured depositors of in liquidation banks as Bridge Bank option secures 1.2 trillion naira deposit and saved 12,667 jobs. It's just pictorial view of individuals on the front page in their Christmas felicitations, which is around the corner.
Okay, quickly before we call it a wrap, I'll take the Blueprint newspaper. WHO COVID-19 Omicron. WHO cautions on travel bans targeting African. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 6. And the writer to the story says rising concerns over spread in UK, Europe countries. And also fuel subsidy removal will aggregate suffering of Nigerians, PFN. The story is on page 19. And the major headline there says jailbreakers trapped in Jos Custodial Center. The writer to the story says kidnappers have relocated to Kwara Kogi, says Gani Adams. Kingpins killed in Kaduna, 10 in Zaria local government works freed. Zamfara police arrest 30-year-old woman arms supplier. Declaration of bandits as terrorists long overdue. Northern youth. All this you can find on page 6 of the paper. Economic growth remains fragile despite positive indicators. CBN, the story is on page 25. FCT empower less privileged APC candidate Abdullahi Ashos. The story is on page 18. NGO drags Senate clerk, 6 others to court over breach of retirement rule. The story is on page 13. Host communities threaten to stop Zungeru Dam commissioning. The story is on page. Well, it's quite tiny, but you find the story on the front page. Fitch reverse projections for Nigeria amid rising foreign reverse. The story is on page 25, and that'll be all we can take on the newspaper review. I hope you're able to cover majority of the paper. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. This comes up every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. here on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio station, powered by the Diocese of Lagos Anglican Communion. You can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook is at Lagoon Radio Nigeria, on Instagram and Twitter is at Lagoonradio.Ng. My name is Taiwa Diola Shabili, and thanks to my co-host Koinsala Alao. Coming up right now is the Moment of Truth by the Venerable Henry Adelegon. Stay blessed. Good morning.
Listening to Lagoon Radio.